All right, welcome to Studies in Proverbs. We are looking today at Proverbs chapter 6. And Proverbs chapter 6 is a series of warnings against folly. Um, in the first 5 verses of Proverbs chapter 6, we have a warning against putting up a pledge. And in this situation, a father is seen as warning a son against putting up a pledge for a neighbor. Now, in ancient times and in many places in the world, this is still done. And it is not necessarily saying you should never put up a pledge for another person, but that you should not do it rashly or without um, reasonable thought. You shouldn't do it if you're going to extend yourself beyond what you can afford. You shouldn't do it if you're not familiar enough with the character of the person you're putting the pledge up for. Um, but you shouldn't do it. Put yourself in a position where you've made a rash decision and may put up a pledge in a um, in a situation that makes you vulnerable. And what we're told to do in that case, if it happens, if you find yourself in that case, you are to do everything within your power. You're to humiliate yourself. You're whatever you do, beg to get out of that pledge. So if you put up security in a bad situation, you need to work as hard as you can to free yourself as you would free yourself from a trap or a snare. Um, Proverbs 6 to 11 warns against laziness and gives an example to consider, and that is the ant. Now, the ant was a lowly bug, not a noble creature by any means, and yet this little insect had the sense to store up a harvest and to prepare for winter. And we as human beings should see the wisdom in that and do it ourselves. There's also a brief uh, proverb in there too about um, laziness leading to poverty and that it will catch you like a bandit. Proverbs 6:12 to 15 uh, is a warning against being deceptive, being one who lies, use secret signs and signals to scheme and cause strife. And the promise there is that those kind of people will ultimately face disaster. Proverbs 16 to 19 is a list of 7 things the Lord hates. 6 things the Lord hates, 7 things that are detestable. And what this signals is that this is not a complete list of things that are detestable to God, but it is a list of things to avoid. Uh, you can also see that these things that the Lord hates are um, all involve human relationships, and some have even claimed that this particular passage uh, is almost like the negative Beatitudes. And um, the list consists of haughty eyes or pride, a lying tongue, uh, hands that are prone to uh, murder, wicked schemes, and doing evil. All of them, those all make reference to parts of the body. False witnesses and causing dissension are the final 2 of the 7. And so you can say these are the things the Lord hates. In contrast, what the Lord loves are those things that are found in the Beatitudes. So Romans 6:20 to 24 then returns to a very common theme in Proverbs. It's the elevation and a reminder of the value of instruction, that it is uh, a guide, that it is light for our paths, that it is good for correction, and it leads us to be able to avoid the immoral woman. Both literal adultery, and the more general easy path that leads to death are referenced here. So we can take this literally, as in avoid adultery, but we can also be seeing adultery as representing not only the act of adultery, but more generally the act of being led into folly. So Proverbs 6:25 to 29 describes the utter folly of adultery. We're not to be drawn to the adulteress. The phrase here, the prostitute reduces you to a loaf of bread, has two potential meanings. The one is literally you are a paycheck. She reduces you to a loaf of bread in that that's how she sees you. You are a meal ticket for her. Or secondly, uh, a prostitute can be bought with a loaf of bread, but the adulteress will ruin your life. And so it's not a parallel, but it's a contrast. Adultery is bad. Going to a prostitute is bad, but adultery is worse. Going to a prostitute will cost you a loaf of bread. In contrast, uh, getting involved with another man's wife is uh, the end of your life, that's going to cause strife. And so those are two possible meanings of that phrase. Both carry the same message, just with a little different emphasis. And it really depends on whether the author's intent was to parallel or to contrast the difference between a prostitute and adulteress. What will be the result? It's like uh, putting burning coals into your lap and expecting you won't get hurt, or walking across hot coals. Punishment is certain. Yes, there are cultures where coal walking is done, but it's more like coal running. Ah, and the point that is being made here is you cannot avoid putting coals in your lap and not getting burnt, or standing in a hot fire and not being affected. In the last section of Proverbs 6 is verses 30 to 35. Adultery is worse than stealing. Theft is seen as understandable. If somebody is hungry and doesn't have enough food to eat, you can understand why a person would um, steal. But even in that case, they will be expected to pay back with penalty. But in contrast, adultery leads only to shame. There's no reasoning for it. You can understand why a man might steal when he's hungry, but there is no way to justify adultery. And so um, that ends this chapter on avoiding various types of folly. We'll see you next time as we look at Proverbs 7.